Welcome to the MHP Exchange, where the riches are in the niches. We'll show you how to invest your way into mobile home parks with real strategies, tips, and behind-the-scenes know-how to grow your cash flow. Stick around. This is where smart investing begins.
Welcome back to the MHP Exchange podcast. And today I'm sitting with Marc Tropp, and he is the head of the MHP group at Eastern Union. Now, he's the guy that operators call when they have challenging deals and they need to get them financed. And today we're going to dive into like a real specific niche and really tough deals that a lot of the industry walks away from. But Marc's going to talk about how he gets those deals done and gets you to the closing table. So we're going to go deep today, and we got Marc Tropp joining us. How you doing today, Marc?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on. Super excited. I always drop, whenever you drop an episode, I always watch it. So congrats on the success, and let's keep it going.
I appreciate that. And before we get started, right? And I haven't seen Marc for a little bit, but before we get started, I am going to share the best Marc Tropp story ever.
Oh
right?
man. Oh man.
And I'm going to set the stage. We're at IMN in Nashville in August. And we just wrapped up the first night. And me and 14 other operators, we went out to dinner. And, the convention's at the Hilton. So if you've ever been in Nashville, right in downtown, we're at the Hilton. So we wrap up dinner. And then myself and Bryce from Caliber Management, we're sitting outside the Hilton and we're talking, right? And if you've ever been there, the Hilton is right outside the Nashville Convention Center. And I see Marc walking by, and I'm like, "Hey, Marc, how you doing? How was your night?" And Marc tells me he had the best night ever. He was just at the Katy Perry concert. And so me and Bryce are looking at each other like, "You went to the Katy Perry concert?" And Marc's like, "Yeah, it was great. I got center row seats." I'm like, "You went to the Katy Perry concert?" He goes, "Absolutely. It was a great time. She was a great performance. It was wonderful." And he left, and Marc was super happy he was there. Had a great, and he leaves, and me and Bryce, the only word I could use, Marc, is that we were just dumbfounded that you would have gone to Katy Perry concert. So we finished the conversation. The next morning, I get up the second day of the conference. Obviously, Eastern Union always has a table there. They always represent at those conferences. And I talk with Emma, right, who works in your office.
Yeah.
And I asked her, I was like, "Hey, how was your night?" She goes, "I had the best night last night." I said, What happened?" She goes, "Well, I told Marc I was such a huge Katy Perry fan, and he went out and bought us tickets to go see Katy Perry." And I was like, "Oh, now it makes sense."
Yeah, I can see that story.
When you took Emma because she told you she was such a fan that you went out of your way to go get tickets for her that night. So because she was in town, which was great and made so much more sense and made me so much happier.
Knowing like coming off weird, thinking that was I went by myself, absolutely on it. But it was a great show. We had a good time. Actually, it's really funny when I thought about it later that night. I was like, yeah, that probably didn't come off well to Frank and Bryce. So maybe in the morning I'll say something to him on it once I register what was going on over there. But absolutely, yeah.
But I would say that was, and that's one of the great if you're out here listening, that is one of the great conferences to go in this space because it's really great for workshops and forums and meeting and networking with people. But I got to tell you, that was probably the highlight of the conference this year, and it's a story that I'll always remember.
Yeah, that's always memorable. That's for sure. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I tend to those smaller conferences, the more the boutique ones, are fantastic. It's great to meet people like you, really get time and sit down and talk about what they're doing. I find the bigger ones are you're just constantly running around meeting people, so you sort of like, hey, you shake hands, just get 5 minutes of FaceTime. The IMN does a really good job. So does a bunch of other smaller ones. But yeah, I agree with you. It's a great conference.
It was a great time. But more importantly, as we're going into this, I mean, you've been in the space for so long. So if you go to these conferences, I mean, you're one of those guys that are always there. But why did you choose, like, how did this become your lane, right? I can't imagine starting out, you said, hey, I want to be the go-to guy in the MHP space. Like, how did that evolve?
So it actually just came out of nowhere. I remember the first deal I did, and I'm actually working on it again right now in a different capacity, but it was 2008. I had a client who was buying a lot of apartment buildings up until that point. He calls me up, he's like, hey, I'm selling my portfolio. I'm buying a mobile home park right outside of Annapolis, Maryland. And I'm sitting there like, this guy's crazy. Like, he's buying a mobile home park, and I'd never done it before. So he's like, what's the financing out there? I said, look, yeah, of course, there's great financing, like any broker says, when they ask about a deal. And I said, great, well, here's the deal, let me know what you can do. And ended up being a fantastic deal. And it really was my entree into the space. And it was very eye-opening in terms of, you have this idea of what a mobile home park is and who lives there. And I got out there and I was completely blown away and completely wrong about the asset class. And I was shocked. And I was like, look, there's got to be an opportunity to build out a platform that is financing mobile home parks. And, there was already industrial, there was already, multifamily, there's already retail, but there wasn't a whole lot of people doing it. So that first deal for Art sort of opened up a idea saying, hey, there's got to be, other things out there. So we ended up closing that deal. That ended up going to agency on the financing. It's a beautiful park, 100, if I remember correctly, it's 120 lots, paved, beautiful. And I then started poking around locally here in Maryland to find out what other opportunities there were. And one thing sort of led to the next. I financed probably about 3 or 4 in that first year. And I said, look, there's good meat on the bones in this space. I remember that first deal I did, he ended up buying it like a 20 cap, which is crazy. He's since gone on, owns probably like 4,000 or 5,000 lots now, an older guy, wow. Retired. And the next deal I did was actually super complicated.
It's easy to retire when you're buying 20 caps.
Yeah.
I will tell you that.
It's funny. It's funny. A lot of my original guys won't buy anymore because they can't get over the hump of, well, I was buying at 15 to 20 caps. Now I'm buying at 8 to 10 caps. If you can even find 8 to 10 caps now in good markets. So it's like any other asset class. People get in early and they do really well, and they just can't get over that mental block of buying in today's market.
But in 2008, when you're doing this, Mark,
yep.
I mean, this is so early. I mean, you're in the midst of the Great Recession, yep. Right? And people aren't even talking about mobile home parks as being a, investment thesis. Like it hasn't even picked up any real traction anywhere. And I mean, not that people didn't own parks before that, but it's very early for, investors finding this space.
Yeah, it was super early, super early. Most of the people I dealt with were the original, developers of the space. It just so happened that Horizon sits in Crofton, Maryland out here. So that sort of opened up, understanding where the space could be. I mean, they're not as big, they weren't as big then as they are today, but it did give me some eye-opening. Actually, the individual that gave me, about 30 minutes of his time to go out and meet with them so I can understand the space. And it was excellent. He's since moved on. But he sort of walked me through the different types of mobile home parks you can get yourself into. And he was great. And he really taught me the space in terms of how to evaluate deals, how to look at deals, understanding, the tenant base that's going to be there. And it was really helpful for me to be able to go out and talk to people and sound educated in doing it. And then the next big deal I worked on was probably 2009, 2010. It was in Northeast Maryland. It was a 320 lot community. And this was probably the most complicated deal I ever worked on. The property itself was originally built for single family homes. And the developer realized that he could sell homes at a faster clip if he had them manufactured. So he turned the whole entire development into 320 separately deeded mobile home lots. That was the first complication. Here's the second complication. He ended up selling off half of them immediately to end users. So half the park was owned by individuals. The other half was owned by him. The lots that he owned had a mishmash of how that was being structured. There was RTOs just for the homes. There's RT homes for the lots plus the homes, and then there's just pure rentals. So that took me out of any traditional bank financing at the time. And there was a small community bank, I remember in York, PA, called People's Bank, that we ended up doing the deal with, and they understood the asset class. There happened to be a lot of mobile home parks just around the York, PA market. So the bank that I worked with knew it, and it was located like 10 minutes off 95. It's sandwiched between two massive retail centers. The occupancy, always exceeded 90%. But the problem was trying to figure out how to release either the homes or the lots, when the people paid them off. And we had to get very creative. It's not so easy because you have really two deeds. You have the deed for the house, and then you have the deed for the land that has to come off. So typically when you do single family lots, you just sell the lot off, and then you pay the bank down, whatever ratio, 120, 125, whatever is on the lot. And this one, in this way, the banker really worked through it and had essentially a double payoff, which is if you pay off the home, you have to have, this paid off in this amount above and beyond what we're giving you guys for the loan, and then same thing with the lot. So it was super interesting. It ended up being a title nightmare, but everyone got through it, and that was probably my most complicated deal up until a few years ago. I had a similar one down in Florida, like this.
It's the interesting thing is it's those types of deals that I think becomes, especially if you love what you do, they become such great learning experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And I know a lot of people shy away from deals that have complexity because it's just, they feel it takes too much bandwidth. But once you can get past that hump, now you have a skill set that 90% of the other investors or lenders in your are just not looking at. And I actually wanted to talk about that type of deal because it comes up more often than you think.
Mm-hmm.
If you're focused on mobile home parks. It's, hey, I'm buying a community that was maybe a subdivision. It's individual deeded lots. I have a park. They might not be continuous. There might be some carve outs of some lots in between that maybe were sold out, not a part of the package. And it does become a financing hurdle, challenge, pitfall in getting those deals done. Now, I know you just did something recently in Florida. You closed out. I mean, was it the same? Was there additional complexity in that?
So that one is a slightly, same thing in terms of individual tax lots. The difference was this was not in one subdivision. This was spread out over 3 or 4 contiguous subdivisions.
Okay.
So it's 57 lots. And some of the subdivisions, this is where it gets a little bit interesting, had HOAs. Some didn't have HOAs. So you had to layer that in on top of the individual tax lots plus the homes on it. And, I actually like these type of complicated deals. It's like putting a puzzle together. How do you put the puzzle together that everyone can look at and understand what's happening? And it's not necessarily that, does the property have a proper debt service or the leverage, right? Those days of banks lending money out to people that's saying, all right, good leverage, good debt service, that's in the past. The big change over the past 12 to 18 months has been experience and creating the story, from a broker, creating the story why the bank should be lending to this individual. And, what we're finding out on the credit side is experience. And it reminds me very similar to coming out of the recession 2008 and banks looking at it saying, that's great, but can the person execute this business plan? And, you have to get in there and really explain to them how they're going to do it. And it's not just a matter of like sending out the rent roll and the P&L and saying, here guys, in the pro forma and saying, it's a good deal. Here's the comps. We're not seeing that anymore. That was great when it happened and everyone did really well. But now it's, they're really looking at experience. And if you've done projects like that in the past or on a number of communities, more banks are going to be more interested in them and say, well, how do you get into the business if you don't, start somewhere? Don't buy your first deal. It's super complicated. What I'm seeing now are people wanting to get into the business, and they're buying more complicated deals because the experienced guys don't want to take the bandwidth to understand how to get that one closed. So that's really been something that's been very challenging with regards to people looking to come into the business now, which is, well, I could buy this 10 or 12 cap, but has X, Y, and Z wrong with it, right? So, and the bigger guys are like, well, I don't want to spend my time on that because I'd rather look at more stabilized deals that I can do more value add to my portfolio, whatever the case is.
Or you see where the premise of, hey, this business is easy if they'll own the homes and I'll just collect a lot rent. It doesn't really matter. Not realizing all the intricacy that goes into place to create that culture, to keep the community working, operating efficiently, properly. And by discounting that to get those complicated deals, it might look like it's a great value, but because you have that complexity, you don't realize that you really need more of a discount to make it work, right? There's no bad real estate. There's only bad prices. Correct. So you take the complicated deals if it's offered at the right multiple, right? If it's offered at the right pricing. And so when you're not experienced, you just might say, hey, look, this looks like it's discounted to something else. And you don't get that level of complexity. You could really end up on the wrong side of, on the wrong side of the investment. You don't want to see that happen. But, you hit on a point where the lenders now are leaning more on history and business plan execution. Are they discounting, or the changes in how they look at the income coming in? I know for a long time they would totally discount park-owned home rent. Are they willing to consider more of that if there's an operator in place that has a pathway for those park-owned homes, or is it all still lot rent based and they're discounting the rest of the income coming from those homes?
So there are more banks now in the space that are willing to consider park-owned home income, way more than there was 2 years ago. I wouldn't say it's a ton, but let's say it's 10% or 15% of our banks that are considering it. And the ones that are doing it are going to be the smaller community banks, the balance sheet lenders. You're still going to have problems with agency right now. It's, that's 35%. Maybe at one point you can get a waiver to 40%. Again, that's gone. They really only stick at the 35% or less. You obviously have Vanderbilt, they'll do it. They're big guys in the POH space. But the bigger guys still aren't looking at it. So if you have a deal that fits within the community bank balance sheet, you're going to have a better chance of getting it placed with them than have them take on the park-owned home income. I'm doing a deal now, actually. This one is in South Carolina, if I remember correctly. 60% of the community is park-owned home. The bank's comfortable with it. They're newer vintage homes. The issue with the park-owned home is how old are they, right? And how much money do you have to put into it if the person picks up and leaves? So that's a major issue. So the newer homes get more lenders willing to consider taking it on as the income. Now the flip side to that story is there's a ton of people that and we know that go and they buy vacant homes and they do complete gut rehab and it's just as new as anything else. The problem is there's no way for any banks to know that because they're tagged no different than a car. So if they say it's built 1978 or 1985, that's how they look at it. So there's no way. And I wish there was a mechanism within the mobile home park space to say, all right, yes, it was bought in it's in 1990, but I renovated it in 2010. Right? There's no way to track that, unfortunately.
Sure. Unless they hire you and you're going to put that in the narrative to the lender.
Of course.
And another, another interesting piece that I want to touch with you, because the individual lots are one challenge. And the second challenge is, we're in a very constrained asset class. Overall, every year we close more parks than we open. So you have communities that have affordable housing needs, but nobody wants to have a new mobile home park built because of whether it's the size requirements, whether it's, the stigma. But one of the levers that you could use, especially because a lot of times if you have the right zoning and you're buying a park that has additional land, is development, is expansion, right? So, I mean, how does that fit into the narrative? How do you work development? Are you doing a lot of new construction development deals? Do you do a lot of development deals on sites where they're doing expansions? Like, how do you? Oh, are there lenders that are eager to even look at those scenarios?
So good question, and I get it. I get asked this a lot. There are lenders looking at brand new construction deals. You either have debt funds that are looking at it, and we've done one debt fund deal over the past 2 years. There was a large construction deal in Florida, and then you have the community bank balance sheet lenders. Now, the main difference is really going to be leverage and interest rate. The debt funds are going to be slightly higher on leverage, let's say 65, 70 max. But you're going to be paying 450 to 650 over SOFR, right? So that's going to be somewhere right now, 9 to 10% interest rate. So if you can stomach it, it's a great, a little less of a headache than the underwriting that you have with the bank. But for a traditional bank debt that you're not paying such high interest rate, and let's say today that'd be like prime plus 1, so that's put you around 775. You're probably gonna be tapped out max 55% leverage for construction. So if you have the wherewithal to do it, it's fantastic. There are people lending it, just not a ton of them right now. Now, with regards to the expansion, if you have an existing park and it's cash flowing, and you can prove out that more lots will get leased, plenty of banks are doing that all day long. And actually, because you have the cash flow there and it's already existing, and you already have utilities on site, big issue now when you're doing new parks is the lenders don't want to do private utilities. So if you're doing a new park, you have to make sure that it's going to be on public utilities. I've had a lot of people come to me looking at the private utilities, and that's just almost a non-starter for either debt funds and or banks looking to do new communities. But with regards to an expansion of an existing one, absolutely. I mean, there's plenty of debt out there for that.
Yeah. And I think that the keys on the expansion is, you could, if you're looking at, you have a community, you've got the infill done, you can measure that expansion with the velocity that you could sell homes. If you have a good read on where that market is, because you're already there, you're in place, the community's up and running, it allows you to phase in that growth and not develop out 70 lots where maybe only 25 or 30 would get filled. And that would still be a great number. So you can kind of phase in that space. Mark, from your experience, I mean, you're doing this almost 20 years now, not to date you right on that, but what are the if you broke it down for the listeners, what are the things that trigger a lender, right, when they're looking at a deal to say, absolutely no, or where you might, somebody might come and say, I think this deal works, but when the lender sees it, they're just, hey man, they want to walk away from it.
So number one thing that they're going to look at across the board is going to be experience. So number one, what's your background in the space? And number two, under the experience category, is have you already owned and operated in this particular market, right? That's going to be the first thing they look at, right, with regards to the borrower themselves. Underwriting, it really just depends what it is. If it's a value add, if it's stabilized. The thing that is raising red flags now with regards to underwriting is people coming in saying, I'm buying a park, rent now is $300, I can get up to $500 in 2 years. Mm-hmm. And there's been a lot of pushback politically with regards to going in and pushing rents on affordable housing. I actually wrote an article about this, and you're seeing a lot of it coming out now. If you just Google search it, that both on the state level and the federal level, they're looking into this. This is really the last horizon for affordable housing in America, and they want to protect it. So the banks are very, very sensitive to going in, pushing those rents, and not doing anything to improve the park to justify those rent pushes. So if you can get past those three things up front, then it's just going to come back down to the standard underwriting to can you execute the business plan? What's the income now? How are you going to improve it? How are you going to manage it? The other thing is management. Is they don't love, I don't want to say absentee, but out of state's a better way of saying out of state management. So that's been another trigger point with the lenders, which is who's managing it, how close they live with the community. If they live out of state, who do they have local that's going to be able to be around to deal with the day-to-day operations, or getting that phone call at 3 a.m. that there's a water leak somewhere. So those have been the much bigger questions that we're getting right now from the underwriting standpoint.
Yeah. So one of those things that you said, and I don't know if people coming into the space, and I know you're in there, and that article that you had that's posted on LinkedIn, and it was in an MH Insider. It's critical. Like, people don't understand the optics have to be part of your strategy. And if you think that you could go, and I know the thesis, and people heard it, like, they come in, people are kind of tethered to the land. It's a sticky resident base, and I could just move rents straight to market, not realizing that there's real people on the ground that it's impacting. If you don't have that sense of what's happening, it's the industry does itself a disservice by kind of giving out that story, right? And to your point, lenders are starting to realize it because they don't want the pushback, right? They don't want to be, they don't want their collateral being the one that their people are protesting in front of. And it is spurring into action other things, which could, end up hurting or changing the industry. So you have to be conscious that, rents might have to go up, right? Listen, you can't run a park efficiently at $200 a month lot rent, right? If you're bringing in professional management, meaning that you're hiring somebody who's a professional that's going to keep the culture, the standards, the community standards, keeping the park clean, you're going to improve the infrastructure, improve the roads, remove all the hazardous conditions. Yeah, you can't do that at $200 a month, right? But you can't do, the alternative is you can't say, hey, I'm not going to do anything, and I'm just going to take you right to $500 a month, right? Like, that's just because you put your name on the piece of paper, it doesn't make you a value add investor.
Correct. Look, I mean, I'm not on that side of the business, so I can only assume that when you guys go in and you guys are doing improvements, they appreciate it. Now, and I can say this with a decent amount of confidence, most park owners, sellers today are still within a first, second generation of the original developer. You can't say that in most asset classes. And because of that, they become like family to these people, right? So like, they've been there for a long time. It's tough to go push rents, and the leverage isn't quite there. A lot of them own them free and clear, so it's not necessarily they're looking for every to meet the market. It's like anybody else when they're doing multifamily. I remember this happened in 2014, 15. People buying apartments, dropping 10 grand in, raising rents $1,000. And I think because of that, they're seeing the lenders want to make sure that doesn't happen in the MHP space, right? Number one, because the fact that it is affordable. But number two, they actually want to make sure that the owners, in your case, I know you guys do this, are being, are adding the value for that dollar. Look, I'm sure you could say this, that people really appreciate you adding amenities or cleaning up, the trees or paving the roads, and they're willing to pay for that.
And Mark, what we try to make sure that the owners know, right? And you could attest to this. Now, I know you don't do home or chattel financing, but I could take a 2003 Fleetwood and I could have it in one area, and maybe that owner could sell it for $15,000 to $20,000. I could take that same home and put it in Myrtle Beach, and they'll sell it for $180,000. And the difference is the dirt in the community, right? So if you own a home, I want you to let them know that we feel that you're just as vested as us. Like, if we improve that community, we're going to help you get a higher value when you want to leave, right? So if you're looking to sell, or maybe you want to rent it out someday because you've done something else, or you've purchased another home or ready to move on or transition to something else, there's value in that. And the value might not be in the home, but it's in where that home is located. And if we can create that value in the land, yes, you've participated in that, and a small portion in that lot rent, but you'll get it back down the road. And I think that's the story that's got to be told. And I think that then it makes sense. But to your point, and listen, there's a lot of really good operators out there that don't do that. But the narrative is on the rents going from 200 to 800 and somebody leaving, that becomes the issue. And so, but to your point, I think you're going to see a lot more of that in the next couple of months, and a lot more questioning about why the practices, what people are doing, how they're doing it, and making sure that you're really adding value to the communities other than just, raising lot rents.
Yeah, and you're seeing on the state level a lot of potential votes coming in with regards to affordability. And, for example, before coming on, I was just reading here locally in Montgomery County, Maryland, that you now have to notify the county before you can do an eviction. Right. Wow. So, yeah. So, and it's getting, so like more and more it's coming out there. I know New Jersey talks about it every year on the slate. New York obviously has it in these other areas. So it'll be interesting to see how this comes out, both on the banking side over the next year and also on the federal, state side as well. But look, it's a great place to live. I mean, it's actually funny. I was probably a year and a half ago, I was touring with an investor that I brought to a deal here in Maryland, and he'd never been to a mobile home park community. And I said, look, let's take a drive. We'll go through them. And we start driving, and there happens to be, there's a bunch of really, really nice ones within about probably 10 minutes where I live. So I pull through, I'm like, and we're driving around, and I said, we finished the tour. I said, well, what do you think of mobile home park? And he goes, when did we go through it? I said, we just did. So a lot of people also just don't realize it. And when they see what it is, it's eye-opening in terms of why they should want it to exist, and they should support, one, the asset class, and two, the expansion of more parks, in your state, nationally.
That's such a great point, because there is such a stigma that towns or counties will have. And you mentioned it before, because a lot of these, this is one asset class where it is multi-generational, and most of the ownership is in second, maybe third generation. And look, what happens? First generation builds it, second generation runs it, third generation just, lets it go. That's predictably what happens in most businesses. And they run these communities many times out of convenience, not out of optimization. It becomes a lifestyle. It becomes an income stream, and they're not used to putting money back into it. So now the mobile home park in town is maybe blighted. Maybe that's where, maybe the standards are less than in some of the apartment buildings. And so it just has this connotation, and that's the stigma that people have. And I think when people see a well-run community, it's the fact that it's a manufactured home doesn't matter. It's actually just a community that's affordable, made with homes that are manufactured somewhere else, because it's able to drive down costs and become a low entry point for home ownership in this country.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was about to say, sorry to cut you off there. I mean, great operators like yourselves recognize that you can't come in, and again, obviously I'm about to say varies from state to state, county to county. It is tough to justify a $300,000 to $400,000 to $500,000 house, when you're 20 or 30. I mean, look, I remember my first job, I couldn't afford, there's no way I could afford that, where houses are selling for now. I mean, so it's mind-boggling to think that, a standard house in some parts of where I live is $500,000 or $600,000. And that's a ton of money.
It's a lot of money.
A lot of money. So the fact that there is a opportunity for people to have ownership, to be able to potentially have some, as they say, build generational wealth or your own personal wealth, by able to buy a home and sell it down the line for more money at a $150 to $250,000 is incredible,
Yeah.
right?
And
it's good, and it's good for everybody, because people, like you said earlier, you want your tenants invested in your community, right? And from an underwriting standpoint, this goes back to the banks. When banks are looking at a refinance, one of the things they've been focusing on is when they tour the property, what is the response they get when they go talk to the tenants, right? So if they're out there and they're happy, and you see people, one of the things that actually we have a bank that does this, their key metric to how successful the community is what does the shrubbery and flowers look like around people's homes? That's it. If people are planting, that means they're there long term and they're happy with the community, right?
that's a great point. Listen, these communities, it's culture is one of the most important things it's one of the things that get overlooked, but you have to build or instill that community culture, because that gets the buy-in, that makes people, that really is what creates the stickiness, right? And then ultimately, right, and you want to say if this is selfishly, whatever the case may be, but when you have residents there who believe in that culture and they're sticky, you know what they also do, if you just want to look at it from an operator, they will be your best sounding board. They will bring more people to that community. And in communities that we know are well run, there's like 3 or 4 different nucleuses that are just bringing people in, right? And they're filling in the vacant lots. Oh, my cousin needs a spot. Oh, my coworker was looking for a place, I told him to come here. My brother, my sister, and that helps fill those communities better. So if you, from the operation standpoint, focus on resident experience, community engagement, it helps do the other things that you'd have to do anyway, right? So it all kind of works in its own ecosystem.
And I find, again, this is back to the underwriting, which is banks realize, unless you've operated before, that isn't inherent when you first buy, to have that mindset.
Yeah.
So someone who's been in this as long as you have and understand that culture, that's why the experience piece on the underwriting side is so important to lenders now, which is
do you get a lot of people, like first time owners, coming to you, or do you deal more with operators? Like what's your bucket?
It's less and less now. I'm getting first time owners come to me. Now it's pretty much operators. I've been in this space. I've been doing this for 21 years now and been doing it since 2008 in the MH space. At this point, I do a lot of consulting. Like, I'm happy if any first time operator calls me up and asks me, I probably won't work with you just because your deal size is going to be too small. And most banks right now have a threshold. If you're lucky, you can find a bank that'll do $1 million deal. Most lenders now have increased it to about $2 million for the minimum deal. But I do a lot of consulting with first-time buyers, because I'll have clients say, hey, I have a friend of mine's kid is looking to get into it. Can you help him do the underwriting? So I'll say, look, no problem. I'll give him half hour of my time, call him up. I said, look at the deal this way. Maybe you should add this to it. So when it comes to first-time buyers, I do a lot of just, I don't know, lack of a better term, pro bono work for them, saying, give me a call, send me your deal. I'm happy to give you, and I'll offer them out to 5 or 6 lenders in those areas to call up. Actually, it's funny. I just did the guy here in Ohio, on a smaller park, 27 lots. I think it was maybe $500,000 or $480,000. And he's referred to me by an existing client of mine. And I think actually the guy used to work for the guy, and he found a community that he wanted to buy. I think if I remember correctly. So Jordan, give me a call. So I spent 30 minutes with him, and I said, look, send me the information. Let's go through the underwriting. Let me tell you how you should present this to the lender and why you will be successful. So that's what I do for the first time buyers, or somebody who's only been in the space for a little bit. Majority of who I'm working with are guys like yourselves, been doing it for 5, 10, 15 years. I have a number of communities on it. So thankfully, it's everyone's done well in the asset class. I actually, when I look at all the different asset classes that Eastern Union finances, the multifamily, industrial, retail, MH, and all the other stuff, I consistently come back to the guys that do the best, in my opinion, are the ones who own the mobile home parks. And there are a number of reasons why that is, but for me, when I look at it, it's more than a real estate transaction. I know that sounds corny. A lot of guys buy apartment buildings that have a third-party company manage the properties, right? So they're removed from the building, they're removed from the tenants. You know, even clients of mine that own 20, 30 parks are still, you know, I don't want to say day-to-day, but they're still involved into the operations, and they're still going out to the communities, and they're still meeting the people that are leasing from them. And there's something to be said about that, that someone can own 2,000 or 3,000 lots and they're still going out to the communities. I can't say that clients of ours that own 2,000 or 3,000 apartments, even like doors, have much connection whatsoever to their tenant base. So there's something about that. You know, I don't reflect on my career by any means. I'm saying, but there's something special about that in the space.
You know, it's funny you say that, Mark, because that's the part of the business. Even as we're, you know, you look to scale and you say, all right, what do you delegate and what do you keep into your own unique ability? And one of the things that we keep, you know, Eric and myself, is, you know, we love the fact that we're going down on site, that we're hands-on, right? We might not be, you know, local, but we're still hands-on, right? And we get a sense and a feel of what's happening, because that community it's like a living, breathing organism, and you're part of it, and you're breathing life into it, and you're seeing that change. And it checks so many other boxes other than just, hey, this is the way that we provide for our families, right? There's other things that are involved that make you be able to, you know, to understand your why, make you push through some of the challenging times that you're going to face in any business, right? It's just because it's just rewarding in a lot of different ways. And goes down to that, I believe, that community feel that you have there. And I think that's a very real thing in this space, that, to your point, you can own industrial space, but what does it matter? I got a logistics company, I got an HVAC company. Great. They're paying the rent. That's all that matters. I go to, you know, you go on to the next. Here, it's a little bit more personal, which makes it really different and special. If, you know, we're doing this now, if you're looking ahead the next 12 months, I mean, what do you see? Is there anything in the industry that you see, like a macro trend that you'd say, pay attention to this, this is what's going on, or anything that you've set your sight on in the next 12 months?
It's a good question. I can tell you where we're seeing a lot of growth is states that are open for business, states that are creating job growth. So if you're looking at buying, if you're looking to get into this space, look at what's happening both near your community and what's happening in the state level. There's a lot more scrutiny on population growth in areas to support, you know, turnover. One of the things that we're seeing is, you know, first, second generation owners, those tenants are now moving on. So the question is, who are you backfilling that with? And that's something else that I look at, you know, when I'm investing in the space. And as from an underwriter standpoint, I want to go to the bank and say, like, this is why it's a good deal. And maybe a small community, like, for example, there are plenty of places where people buy in the communities, or I say the population is only 3, 4, 5, 10,000 people, right? And it does, and it serves well for that community. But banks look at it and say, well, now what? So, you know, I'll take Alabama as a good example. Alabama is a great state to be buying in my opinion. There's a tremendous amount of job growth, and people are willing to drive. And this is kind of a nuance, especially in a bigger city. People are willing to drive 30, 40 miles for a job, right? Think about this. For me to get from my house to Washington, D.C., it's an hour. That's what, 9 miles? And I sit in my car wanting to shoot myself. Right? I'm going to have to do that drive. But if I'm in my car and I'm driving 75 and, you know, even if it's 45 minutes, I'm listening to a podcast, the radio, take a phone call in the car, whatever the case is, I'll do that every day of the week. So understanding, you know, that those circles that expand out from your park or your community, that's something that I would focus in on coming up this year. But I do think the space is going to blow up in 2026. It's already been blowing up for the past 10 years. I think it's going to be even hotter. Interest rates coming down, which is obviously a big perk on it, and affordability. I mean, look, I'm going to keep preaching the affordability component to it. People don't necessarily want to take on massive debt anymore like my parents did, and Frank, probably your parents, and probably what the both of us did, because that was the trend to do. But people like, having that flexibility of how to use their cash, not necessarily to pay their mortgage, but maybe take a vacation, go somewhere, travel, whatever, however it works. And I think that's going to continue at least the next year, in my opinion.
I'm going to second what you said. I think affordability is a main issue. It's running straight through. And I already think you're starting to see the consumer stretched in a couple of ways. So, and I think we're at a point where you got some constraints and you've got to be able to work within that. And I think that's an important thing to look at. And what you said on the markets, at knowing the external markets, not just the local market, but the external market, is so key. Because a park might be a great deal, a great opportunity, a great numbers, but if that population is declining or it's aging out, like, you're going to have some challenges 4, 5, 6 years from now, right? Or maybe on exit. So that's something to consider. Mark, always great talking with you, and I appreciate you taking the time.
Absolutely.
And I'm looking forward to our next deal together. And more important, I'm looking forward to the next time that I get to see you.
And Frank, next conference, you're going to a concert with me.
Next time, definitely, because listen, apparently if I just mentioned it, you'd be buying the tickets, which was great, which was I mean, not many, which was an awesome thing to hear anyway. But if you're listening to this episode, I have one question for you at home. Would you help somebody who you don't know if they wanted to learn how to find, fund, or operate their next real estate investment or their mobile home park? And if your answer is yes, then on the streaming platform you're listening to, rate this episode and share it with a friend. That's how we grow the audience and we get to more people. So if you could do that, you'd be helping somebody you don't know, the way Mark helps people who are looking to find their first park. And Mark, if they wanted to reach out to you, I know you're pretty accessible. How would someone contact you if they wanted to reach out to you or to Eastern Union?
Yeah. If you go onto my LinkedIn, you'll see my full contact information there. Give me a phone call. If I don't pick up, shoot me a text, shoot me an email. I will reply probably within 24 hours. But I'm here to help. I had a great mentor when I was younger that helped me through the business, time of the business, and I'm grateful for that. And I think, for the next generation, whether it's if you wanted to get a brokerage or wanted to buy parks, I'm here to help, and hopefully that we create that next generation of owners, operators.
Mark, thank you very much. I appreciate it. And for everybody listening out there, happy investing.
Thanks, Frank. Take care.